great pleasure to be with you all here today, and it is an even greater pleasure for me to be able to introduce to you our next speaker. Our next speaker is someone I've known for quite a few years, and I've been trying to get him to speak to you since I began at Bioneers 4 years ago. There are two main reasons I thought Cory Doctorow could make an invaluable contribution to our gathering. First, I think he is one of the most visionary, prophetic, and lucid science fiction authors of our era. Someone whose work has profound things to tell us about our society and its possible futures. The other, more pressing reason is because I think the battle for an open internet, one we are in the midst of right now, doesn't get sufficient attention. And it is one that will have an enormous implication on our future. And Cory, a genius at communication and the diffusion of ideas, has been one of the planet's most effective and passionate defenders of an open internet. Cory's personal trajectory has been a fascinating one. He's a Canadian citizen. I think we have about 6 Canadians speaking here today, which speaks to the brilliance of Canada. He was raised by Trotskyists. His father was born in a displaced persons camp in Azerbaijan. On his journey to becoming a preeminent science fiction philosopher, activist, Cory founded a number of open software companies in Canada. He then moved to London and became one of the world's leading activists for liberalizing copyright laws of a Creative Commons and of the free flow of information and ideas, working with a number of like-minded organizations, especially the Electronic Frontier Foundation, for whom we're partnering on this conference today. He was their European Affairs Coordinator for about 4 years, after which he became an EFF Fellow, and he's currently active with EFF's campaign for the eradication of digital rights management. Cory has also had a dynamic career on both sides of the Atlantic, including teaching at USC, where he and I first met, being the first independent studies scholar in virtual residence at Ontario's Waterloo University, and a visiting professor at UK's Open University. He's also the prolific co-editor of one of the most popular, interesting weblogs out there, the very popular Boing Boing, which receives 3 million visitors a month. For a window into his breadth, depth, and head-spinning pace of production, check out his Twitter feed. There's simply not enough time in this introduction. Cory's prescience is legion and truly can only be best captured by reading his books, but I'll cite one. In the early 2000s, in his book Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, he imagined an era in which our world would be influenced by digital social capital and inferred a world governed what we today know as likes, but he termed it as woofy. And somehow, Cory finds the time to be a parent and a partner and to do what he's most renowned for, his prolific career as a writer of cutting-edge science fiction for both the adult and young adult markets. His many books include Eastern Standard Time, Little Brother, Makers, The Rapture of the Nerds, Pirate Cinema, Homeland, and his just published deeply relevant, revolutionary utopian novel, Walk Away, which I just finished and strongly recommend. So please join me in welcoming one of the most brilliant and interesting people I know, one of the greatest writers, thinkers, and activists of my generation, and someone whose message could not be more urgent and critically important, Cory Doctorow.
Thank you very much. So, you know, I'm a writer and a technologist, which means that I have to be in favor of metaphors. I can't really dislike them. But I want to talk today about some of the problems of metaphors, because as useful as they are, they really have the power to mislead us and get us into trouble. This is not a trash can. You can drag files, which aren't files, in folders, which aren't folders, into this trash can, which isn't a trash can, and empty it, which doesn't empty it. Because after you empty it, the files aren't gone, because this isn't a trash can and those weren't files. So when you delete secretplan.doc by dragging it into the trash, your computer just erases the entry for it in the catalog of its file system, so anyone knows how to look for it can find it later, as innumerable criminal suspects have discovered when the cops seize their computers and bring them into a forensics lab. So you can call this metaphor debt. Metaphors extend credit to us in the form of these easy-to-grasp abstractions that let us work with complicated ideas, but then they take interest from us in the form of the shear between these useful handles and what's actually going on in the underlying technical reality. And metaphor debt can be very toxic because you never get a term sheet for it. You never know exactly how much that metaphor debt is going to cost you in the long run. And this is a particular problem in tech, because in tech, we deal strictly in metaphors. We operate in bits that are abstracted to bytes, and the bytes are abstracted to operators, which are abstracted to high-level programming languages, which are abstracted to GUIs, which are abstracted to fat-fingered presses on capacitive screens. So to give you a sense of just what happens when we incur metaphor debt, when we mistake metaphors about technology for reality, cast your mind back to 1984 in this wonderful movie, War Games, that Matthew Broderick was in, where as a teenager he uses an acoustic coupler to nearly start World War III and cause a mass extinction event. And as scary as that movie was, and in some ways as pressing as it was a metaphor for what people were doing with computers that Congress took literally. In the ensuing cry for Congress to do something about computer crime, which was an actual problem and which prosecutors didn't really know how to handle, they were left with the embarrassing spectacle of charging people who'd stolen sensitive databases with the theft of a microwatt of electricity. Congress enacted the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in 1986. You know, it's the old security tautology, something must be done. Hey, we've done something. And under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, exceeding your authorization on a computer that doesn't belong to you, as Matthew Broderick does in War Games, is a felony, and that can send you to prison. So over the years, that has come to mean that violating the terms of service on any website that you access is a potential felony that you can go to jail for. And that's how we got this problem. This is my old friend Aaron Swartz. Aaron was one of the founders of Reddit. He did several important and exciting things. He got in trouble with federal prosecutors when he went and liberated 1 million documents from Pacer, the court records database, and showed that the court clerks were improperly redacting them, and that they were including things like social security numbers, home addresses of minors who'd been assaulted, and lots of other things that you would hope that they would remove before they put them into a public database. The federal prosecutors and the FBI couldn't make anything stick. They harbored a grudge against him. And then Aaron, one day, when he was a fellow at Harvard, walked up Mass Ave to MIT, where he was allowed to be, and he logged into their Wi-Fi, which he was allowed to log into. And he connected to an academic database, which he was allowed to access. And he downloaded some academic articles, which he was allowed to download. But the terms of service said that he had to download them by clicking on the links. And instead, Aaron wrote a script to download those. He checked too many books out of the library. And the federal prosecutors that he had made such a mockery of, they charged him with 13 felonies. And he was facing 35 years in prison. A couple of years later, they had spent every cent that he'd saved by dragging out the pretrial motions, and broke and desperate and facing a long prison sentence in 2013, Aaron hanged himself. And that's what happens when metaphor debt gets out of control. Now, the 1980s were a source of many rich metaphor debts. In the 1980s, there were multiple competing standards for analog television. Notably, there was PAL in Europe, and NTSC here in America, which people used to joke stood for never twice the same color. Now, the existence of these two incompatible standards, they were a boon to the movie studios because they could stagger their releases. They could release VHS cassettes in Europe on PAL format, and they could know that people who went to Europe and brought them back to America couldn't watch them. And so they could guarantee their distributors that something that was released in one window wouldn't show up in another territory later on. But then along came DVD players, and being digital, DVD players had no trouble handling both NTSC and PAL, and that made release windowing hard. Now, at root, the problem was that the studios had a metaphor debt. It was that a DVD player or a Sega Dreamcast or any of these other devices, they aren't specialized appliances that play video games. They're not VHS decks that happen to accept small, flat, round cartridges. They are general-purpose, Turing-complete von Neumann architecture computers capable of executing any instruction that we can express in symbolic logic that just happen to have a CD drive attached to them. The response to this was to pass a law called the Dmca in 1998 that enshrined metaphor debt into law. The Dmca stands for the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and it has this section 1201 that makes it a felony, again, to bypass an effective means of access control for a copyrighted work. Now, the purpose of this odd bit of jargon is to ensure that you couldn't tell your Turing-complete von Neumann architecture computer, capable of executing any instruction we can express in symbolic logic, to execute instructions that pissed off the manufacturer. Now, here's how that works. We're going to do a little bit of Cryptography 101. In Cryptography 101, we have this idea that there are three parties in the simplest case. There's Alice and Bob and Carol. And Alice and Bob, they know and like each other and trust each other, and Carol is evil and wants to spy on them. So Alice and Bob, they send a message to one another, and they make some assumptions about what Carol can do with that message. The first thing they assume is that Carol knows that the message exists and can get a copy of it. This is a smart assumption in the 21st century because so many of the networks that we use have people that we might think of as our adversaries on them. Maybe Carol is sharing the same Wi-Fi segment as them. Maybe Carol is a hostile government that's suborned their phone company. Maybe it's an unethical employee at the phone company. Or maybe Carol just happens to be on the same continent as them, and one segment of their communication traverses a satellite link that has a footprint as large as a whole continent. Assuming Carol can't get a copy of your message is a fool's paradise, because in many cases, people we don't trust can get a copy of our scrambled messages. They also assume that Carol knows how they scrambled the message, what algorithm they used, what math they used. And the reason for that is that the only way we know how to test a security system is the way that we know how to make any kind of reliable knowledge, which is to subject it to adversarial peer review, to tell people what you think you know and allow third parties, especially people who don't like you, to point out your dumb mistakes. The difference between science and alchemy is peer review, right? Alchemists kept what they knew a secret for 500 years. They didn't advance the art very much, and each of them learned in the hardest way possible that drinking mercury was a bad idea. And the only alchemical thing that alchemists ever did was to start publishing what they thought they knew, and then they converted the base metal of superstition into the precious metal of science, of knowledge. And so in security, you publish your algorithm so that you can have all of your adversaries tell you about your dumb mistakes. So Alice and Bob have told Carol how they scrambled their message, and they gave her a copy of the scrambled message, but they still need Carol not to be able to read the message. And the way that they accomplish that is by devising an algorithm that scrambles a message by combining the algorithm, the original message that's in the clear that a human being can read and experience, and a secret key. And so long as the key is kept secret, Carol can never decrypt the message. And when I say never, I mean like never. I mean like if you take a file, like an email or a message, and you save it to your encrypted distraction rectangle, in a time so short that you don't even notice it happening, your phone has encrypted that message so thoroughly that if every hydrogen atom in the universe were a computer, and it did nothing until the heat death of the universe but try and guess what the key was, we would run out of universe long before we ran out of possible keys. So crypto works. But then you get the copy protection version of crypto, or what we might call voodoo crypto. And that's where you just have Alice and Bob. So Bob is Netflix. Bob wants to send you a movie and wants to make sure that you don't write a player for it that can save it to your hard drive to watch later. Bob wants to control how you use the movie when you get it. And so Bob gives Alice, which is you, me, and anyone who wants to spend $10.99 to get a Netflix account this month, a copy of a program. Now, if that program doesn't have the ability to descramble the movie that Bob has sent you, you are not going to give Bob $10.99, because that cryptographically encrypted movie is not very interesting to watch unless you can decrypt it. So Bob has to give you a means to decrypt it, and the way that he does that is he hides in the program he gives you the keys that are necessary to descramble the message. Well, we have a name in security for what happens when you give people who you don't trust the keys to decrypt a message and then hope that they never figure out where you hid them. We call it wishful thinking. Because Alice includes bored grad students with an electron tunneling microscope and nothing to do this weekend in a room full of undergrads hanging around like a bad smell looking for something useful to do. So this is why people who build DRM, they spend millions and years, DRM, digital rights management, these copyright locks, they spend millions and years on it, and then it's broken in afternoons by hobbyists working, with teenagers. It's not because they're stupid, it's because they're doing something stupid. So once we've reflected on how this is not real security, let's also talk about how it's not really copyright enforcement either. Saving a video that you paid Netflix to watch is not piracy any more than recording a movie that you have paid your cable operator to watch is piracy. Playing a game that Apple didn't sell you on your iPhone that you bought from someone else is not piracy. Buying a movie overseas and bringing it home to watch on your DVD player, that's not piracy. That's the opposite of piracy. All of those are paying the copyright owner what the price that they named, and then trying to go home and consume the copyrighted work that you bought. It is the literal opposite of piracy. It's what copyright is supposed to do. So this is really about being able to control non-piracy related uses using anti-piracy law. Now, the debt that this incurs can't be overstated. When you say that we have made a computer that is capable of running only some of the programs and not the ones that piss off the manufacturer, you're effectively writing a liar loan and incurring a kind of subprime debt in businesses in many, many sectors, this pretense that computers are incapable of doing your bidding under some circumstances. The reality is that a DVD player isn't incapable of playing an out-of-region disc. It refuses to play an out-of-region disc. It's not that an iPhone can't play an app that I make and sell to you. It's that it won't play an app that I make and sell to you unless we use Apple as our intermediary. These aren't incapable computers. These are disobedient computers. These are the "I can't let you do that, Dave" computers. So liar loans, they give us these disobedient computers. It's the worst kind of subprime technology debt, the kind that mounts up compound interest that eventually we can't pay back. Because disobedient computers, they have to sneak and lie. If disobedient computers put the program that stops you from running programs the manufacturer doesn't like where you could see it, then you would just get rid of it, right? If there was an icon on your desktop labeled HAL9000.exe, you would drag it into the trash. And so the only way these computers can work is if they deliberately obfuscate some or all of their functionality from you, the person who relies on them. So this metaphor debt invites us to view disobedient computers as features and not bugs. Every company could make more money for its shareholders if only you were forced to use their products in ways that were optimized for the vendor's profits rather than for your own benefit. And when companies can force their customers to pay for the full enjoyment of the property they lawfully acquire, they certainly do. So let's think of HP here. In March 2016, HP pushed out a security update to its OfficeJet and OfficeJet Pro printers, tens of millions of printers. When you woke up in the morning, there was a note on your screen telling you to press here to update. And after you updated, as with every other update you've ever installed, nothing visible happened. And indeed, no new security was added to your printer. Instead, there was a kind of Manchurian feature added to your computer. Over the next 6 months, the printer silently counted down until September 2016, when all of those printers suddenly woke up and began to search for, recognize, and reject third-party ink. So people all over the world found that their printers didn't work one morning, and they tried known good third-party cartridges and it didn't work. They threw away their printers, they generated tens of thousands of complaints, and eventually we figured out what was going on. HP had deliberately broken millions of customers' property to punish them for failing to arrange their affairs to benefit HP's shareholders. And then a year later, last month, they did it again. So the DMCA, it doesn't just give a company the right to dictate how you use a product, it also gives companies a monopoly over who gets to tell you about defects in their products. Disclosure of product defects, after all, can help you remove these copyright locks. And so the DMCA goes so far not just to prohibit tampering with copyright locks, but also disclosing information that could help you do it. So a defect in a product will fester, often quietly exploited by bad guys who don't care about copyright liability, until some security researcher finally gets up the nerve to tell us all what has been known by the manufacturer and by the victims for a long time. And that means that every device is insecure and connected to your network becomes an attack surface, a vector for bad things. In 2011, a researcher called An Kui, who was then at Columbia University, published a paper called Print Me If You Dare, where he showed that if you sent those HP printers a document that had hidden in them an operating system update, that he could turn them into a Trojan horse inside your network, one that would attack all the computers behind your firewall, open a reverse shell back to his computer, and allow you to plunder every device inside your network just by sending a file called resume.doc to your HR department. When we suppress disclosures of security defects, all kinds of bad things start to happen. So in February 2017, we learned about this company, Cloud Pets. By that point, their share price was down 98%, and as far as we can tell, almost no one was working there anymore. But before then, they had sold 2 million smart soft toys to people around the world. These toys had a Wi-Fi access point. You connected them to your network, paired them to an app on your phone, and your kid could hug the toy and whisper something into it, and it would come out of your phone, and you could say something back, and it would come out of the toy. And Cloud Pets had put all 2 million of their customers' data, including the messages, passwords, and billing information, in an unencrypted, unpassword-protected Amazon bucket that was visible on the public web. Security researchers tried in vain for months to contact them, unwilling to come forward without incurring this liability for disclosing these defects, until they heard back from the manufacturer. And what they found was that in this database were multiple ransom notes from thieves who had stolen the database and said, "I will disclose this database unless you give us money." Months old threats that had just sat there with no one noticing them. And finally, the researchers came forward. And contemplate for a moment the kinds of things that people say to their cloud pets. It's not just, "I love you, Mummy, when are you getting home from work?" It's things like, "I'm scared I'm in the hospital, Mummy. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow." Or, "Don't worry, kid, Mummy's in the hospital, but I'm sure everything will be fine." That information is now infinitely prolonged and will float around on the internet forever. And then here in the Bay Area in 2016, there was a short-lived news cycle about nanny cams, because there was a family whose 3-year-old said that the baby monitor in his room, which he called the phone, was scaring him at night by talking to him. And one night his mom was walking past the room, and she heard some random person's voice swearing at her child, and she walked in, and the camera pivoted around to look at her, and a stranger's voice said, "Uh-oh, Mommy's in the room," and she never heard the voice again, and doesn't know what happened to that person or the footage that was gathered from her camera. The temptation to put sensors and DRM in our devices is seemingly endless and infinitely unwise. Think for a moment of the semi-orthoscopic sex toy, which is exactly what it sounds like, a sex toy with a camera in the tip. And in April 2017, security researchers came forward to say that they had unsuccessfully attempted to warn the company that its default Wi-Fi password of 88888888 and unpatched vulnerabilities in its firmware allowed anyone, anywhere in the world, once it had been compromised, to tap into it and see it through its camera. And after repeated warnings, the company had never come back to them. No orifice is unplugged in the world of copyright protection. In 2016 at CES, this company unveiled its Internet of Things rectal thermometer, which gives us this kind of attack surface up our literal asses. Now, companies don't do this stuff because they want to be insecure. They do it because they want to pursue petty and illegitimate advantage in the marketplace, and they are indifferent to the security implications. They do it because they want to control their competitors. Recall that Netflix made quite a business out of mailing these red envelopes around, even though the motion picture studios called it a form of theft. And because there was no means by which the motion picture industry could turn its preference that people not put DVDs in red envelopes into a law, Netflix was able to thrive. But every pirate becomes an admiral. And so this year, Netflix helped the World Wide Web Consortium, which has historically been the place where open standards for the web were made, to create a copyright protection scheme for the World Wide Web itself, one that makes it a felony to audit components of browsers that can be used to attack you in every conceivable way. We at Electronic Frontier Foundation propose that the World Wide Web Consortium make it a condition of membership that members promise not to attack security researchers, people making accessibility adaptation, or legitimate competitors as a condition of proceeding with this, and Netflix rejected all of those proposals. When your devices refuse to obey you, when the dead hand of the manufacturer lies on them, ready to go upside your head for failing to arrange your affairs to the maximum benefit of its shareholders, you are no longer the owner of that property. You have become a tenant of it. And we have a name for a system where only small elites get to own property. It's called feudalism. But in modern digital feudalism, we don't even have a human aristocracy. Our aristocracy, the only property-owning class, are transhuman immortal colony organisms called limited liability corporations that treat human beings as their inconvenient gut flora and food source. We are now only one vision system away from a toaster that won't toast unauthorized bread. We are one RFID away from a dishwasher that won't wash third-party dishes, and it will be a felony to reconfigure them because the DMCA draws no distinction between Apple getting to decide whose apps you put in your phone and KitchenAid deciding whose bread you can put in your toaster. Enough is enough. Thank you. So, economists have a useful idea called the Ulysses Pact, named for this guy, Ulysses. Before Ulysses sailed into the sea of the sirens, whose songs could make men jump into the water, he had himself lashed to the mast. He took advantage of a moment when he was strong to do something to protect him against a future moment where he would be weak. This is like throwing away the Oreos the night you go on a diet, right? You know that later on you will be tempted. So I'm going to propose a Ulysses Pact to you. It's in two parts. The first part is that devices should always obey their owners. When there is a contradiction between the thing that the owner wants to do and a remote party wants the device to do, whether that's a government, a law enforcement agency, an employer, a school, or the manufacturer, that the device should listen to its owner. And the second is that security defects should always be lawful to disclose. Even though there are reckless ways to go public with security defects, allowing anyone to decide who can tell the truth about defects in systems that we rely on is far worse than the consequences of the most reckless disclosure. And I charge you never to contribute to products, designs, or activities that undermine these principles, to be hardliners for them. If they're not calling you unrealistic fanatics, you are not trying hard enough. Now, at Electronic Frontier Foundation, we're doing our part. We have this project, Apollo 1201, to get rid of the DMCA and laws like it everywhere in the world within a decade. We're suing the US government to invalidate DMCA 1201 right now, but this is not a fight we can win on our own. This is a group effort, and we need you. Because if we lose this fight, we lose everything. I mean, what a shitty dystopia to end up in, one where we get Huxley'd into the full Orwell, where our entertainment technology and its law is the way that we end up with totalitarian control. The world has far worse problems than the destiny of the internet and our technology, and we've heard about them here: climate and gender, racial inequality, wealth inequality. But those fights, they will be won or lost on the internet. Without a free, fair, and open internet infrastructure, we've lost those fights before we're joined. As Aaron Swartz said before he died, in the 21st century, it is no longer acceptable for politicians not to understand technology. Metaphors cost something. It's a metaphor to say information wants to be free, but information doesn't want to be free. I actually wanted to get to the bottom of this, so Information and I went to Mendocino last month. We built a sweat lodge, we drank Okie Chardonnay, we cried about our fathers, we had a drum circle, and at the end, Information took me in a long, manly hug. I felt its beard rasp my cheek and smelled the smoke in its hair, and it whispered its secret into me, which is that all information wants is for us to stop anthropomorphizing it. Because information does not want a damn thing, but people want to be free. And the way you make people free in an information society is with a free, fair, and open internet infrastructure. Together, we can realize that dream. Thank you.